Hey, folks. All right, can everyone hear me? Awesome, great. So, hey, everyone, in this talk, I want to tell you about the effort to improve the Xbox onboarding journey for gamers who are new to Xbox or new to gaming in general. And my hope is that this will be valuable for those of you working in games or aspiring to work in games, because there's some students here that I know, as you will undoubtedly also need to think about onboarding for players new to your game or new to gaming all up. Before digging into the topic of improving the Xbox onboarding experience, I want to give credit to my team. They worked closely with me on this whole effort that I'm representing in the talk today. The phrase, "it takes a village," is definitely relevant when it comes to the things that I'm going to be representing today. So Emma, Jazz, Ryan, and Sonika all worked closely with our various partners across the gaming org within Xbox at Microsoft to help our partners reach their goals and ultimately ensure the best possible gaming experience for our players. We also partner with user researchers, data analysts, accessibility specialists, product managers, content designers, and developers, and many more to produce the final experience presented in the talk today. So what was the problem? Insights had showed us that we needed to invest more in our onboarding experience, as our new players had the highest likelihood of churning out. And we were getting a really good number of players every single month. So we asked ourselves, how might we go about improving the onboarding experience for our players? Following our creative process, which is based on the double diamond model, we started with the discover phase by conducting internal usability studies, diary studies, and competitive analysis. We started by talking to our players. We found out from 400 plus existing and brand new Xbox customers is that they had a wide range of issues when going through the onboarding experience. We conducted a usability study where 400 plus new users would take home an Xbox console to gather first impressions, understand issues, and gain insights. And we also conducted a teenage diary study where 15 teenagers unfamiliar with Xbox were sent a console where we required them to go through onboarding and asked them to share their thoughts in the following weeks. They also got to keep the Xboxes afterwards, and they were really happy about that. So these 4 pain points helped us identify what was missing in our current experience. Long and complex setup process. New players felt intimidated during the setup process, as they were not familiar with what was needed and were just excited to start playing games. Difficulty learning controller buttons. Many struggled to understand what different controller buttons do, like how pressing B would take you back and how the physical controls map to the digital responses. And it was hard to discover key features. Participants struggled to locate their games, exit games, turning off their console, and finding where to change important settings. And last, unable to revisit learnings. Existing Xbox players were unable to get a refresher when they forgot how to do certain things, if they hadn't done it for a long time or they hadn't done it often. We put together an in-depth competitive analysis as well to understand what works well and our key trends outside of our own environment. Looking at what our competitors did for their onboarding experience, a few learnings stood out. Interactive progression. Nintendo leverages a strong visuals and haptic feedback as a user is thoroughly introduced to new UX. Contextual teaching. PlayStation uses helpful contextual tips, informational empty states, and overlays as a new user explores their UI. And making it easy to revisit. Apple makes it incredibly easy to revisit learning and get up to speed by viewing short animated illustrations and text blurbs. As we looked through our research and findings, we asked ourselves, how might we go about improving and making more confident onboarding experience to reduce friction and churn for new to Xbox players? We then moved to the define phase of our process, defining customer needs and the principles we would uphold for the onboarding experience itself. We started by defining customer needs across both our console and smart TV experiences. On console, this includes things like making it easy for users to learn controller buttons, guiding new users through the experience contextually, giving users actionable steps in avoiding dead ends, and providing them with a place where they can easily revisit information. On Smart TV, we focused on building familiarity with owned Xbox or third-party controllers and remote controls, making the experience as simple and usable as other entertainment apps available on TV platforms, allowing users to learn controller buttons and shortcuts contextually, and ensure jumping across devices felt seamless and coherent. In this onboarding effort, we would define design principles, like with all other UX efforts that we work on. Before going over what those principles were, I want to give you a quick overview of how we approach design principles in general to give you a better idea of how they come together. When defining design principles for specific experiences or products, we want to ensure that they're not generic. When evaluating them, we ask ourselves if we would consider the principles valuable or applicable in other projects, potentially all other projects. If the answer would be yes, the principle would not be considered valuable enough for the specific effort we're working on. Anything which could just be seen as a generic best practice could simply be part of the overall design system or style guides. Our principles should also be few in order to be able to strongly guide us and our partners throughout the creative process. We often try to stick to just 3 principles for a single project. Our principles should also either act as a razor to provide valuable constraints and focus, or as an aspiration to help push something forward. And we wanted to keep them short and to the point to ensure that they're easily understood, referenced, and remembered by others. So with that context, here are the design principles we defined for onboarding specifically. Don't get in the way of users' primary goal. Strike a balance between focusing on only the fundamentals and letting users get to their destination. Teach in contextually relevant moments. Learning is most effective and engaging when skills are taught in the moment as needed, without overly dense learning. Become masters at your own pace. Users have different past experiences, learning rates, and skill levels. And we want to provide users with a place to return for instructions and review learning at any time. We then established key locations within the experience to apply these principles to, starting with setup, revisiting our setup experience to help better explain things. Then the experience of landing on home, helping users understand how their controller works, how to navigate around, and play their first game, the ultimate goal. And revisit learnings, making it easy to revisit information, provide tutorials, and more. We then moved into the explore phase of our process, exploring various design ideas and iterating on them, producing user journeys, and defining solutions. In the first case study of the different solutions we did, we asked ourselves how might we reduce time and complexity in the setup process itself. Before starting, we needed to know how our players felt about the setup process as it was. So our UR team was able to gather participants with varying levels of familiarity with Xbox and produce a satisfaction score out of our current experience. The score was based on a variety of factors like enjoyable, easy to use, intimidating, inconsistent, fast, and friendly. In 2018, we got a 3.63 out of 5 score, which incentivized us to do better. We heard things like, too many steps and prompts. Why does my Xbox need to update? It takes too long. And too many screens that are not relevant to me. Tough to hear. So why do we get that score? Here's what we found. The first takeaway was there were just too many steps. Our 2018 setup had 2 parts. There was a general and a welcome flow. And each of them had 8 steps, making it a total of 16 steps in the setup process. Participants from the study commented that this just felt like too many steps, and they labeled it as a detractor of enjoyment. Some noted a few felt that few of the steps felt redundant, For example, feedback indicated that they wanted choosing a language, location, and time zone to just be in a single step. The next challenge we found was lengthy updates. Participants didn't understand why the console needed to update and why it took so long. They mentioned that there was too much downtime with a lot of steps to go until being able to play. And people had trouble signing in. 30% of participants mentioned they had issues signing in, since Xbox requires you to sign in with an existing Microsoft account. Some brought up the issue around having difficulty typing on the console or having trouble remembering account information. So here's what we did to improve. Right after plugging in the Xbox console, you're presented with two options: to set up the console or with your phone using the Xbox app. And in order to address our biggest pain point, we targeted simplifying the setup process by focusing on getting users to play as quickly as possible. Should a user skip the option to set up on their mobile device, they could continue on their console, but it was heavily incentivized and encouraged to move to the mobile device. We were able to cut down the general flow of 8 steps to 4 steps and placed essential parts into the mobile setup itself. The next solution was to make it enjoyable, allowing users to speed through setup while updating. As the console updates, users can continue to set it up on their mobile device. And participants appreciated the mobile setup information and options that were presented to them. We did this based on the insight we got from our UR team, which was, rather than taking up a lot of downtime, leverage install moments to further progress or teach tips. The next solution was aimed at reducing friction, provide easier setup on mobile. Participants entering information on the console spent extra time and effort. So we provided an easier option to do the setup on a mobile device. The insights we leveraged here is that it can be beneficial for users to support other input methods to make things smoother, especially if the first input method has a challenging or slow method of typing in, for example, a username and password, which is the case with a controller. So how'd we do? We got a new satisfaction score of 4.09 out of 5. Participants on average rated the setup with phone sign-in screen positively, and they averaged the highest in categories like ease of use and learn to use quickly. All right, so moving on to our second case study of solutions. When a brand new user lands on home but isn't familiar with their new Xbox controller, how can we help them learn how it works intuitively? Because we observed that some users felt intimidated by the controller. We found out that new users of Xbox consoles face issues such as an overwhelming, confusing first experience on the home screen and confusion about function of controller buttons. Device confusion, hard to navigate, overwhelmed, and inability to revisit learnings were all painful but real insights we learned. A couple of examples of pain points our new to Xbox customers told us about. It was my second time using the console. Therefore, there was a learning curve, and I was a bit confused by the function of buttons. I was kind of unsure about trying it because I've never really used a controller before. So why was this happening? Further collaboration with our UR team brought some key takeaways to light. There is a learning curve that comes with new input type. New to Xbox players are learning a new input modality with a lot of buttons for the first time often. Contrary to what might be more familiar to many people, for example, using point and click and touch, using D-pad requires one to acquire and learn a different approach to input. Conventional things like pressing A to select and pressing B to go back are not necessarily things a brand new user will just intuitively know to do. Controller button legends felt obscured. The legend, which was located in the bottom right corner, was undiscoverable for some players, especially when they were trying to learn a new interface in a 10-foot layout environment. And there's an assumption based on console players. The experience initially assumed the player expertise in console, or specifically Xbox controllers, which wasn't always the case. There were some things we tried, but they didn't work out. Let's dig into why. Having a catch-all controller tutorial during setup, Sounds like a great idea initially, but this added to the burden on users to rely on recall over recognition. It feels disruptive to users' goal to get started quickly, and going through it had the potential to not make the user feel like they understood it any better after completing it, due to how separated it is from the actual experience. And displaying all the buttons in the legend. This would increase cognitive load in an already overwhelming UI. It overly complicates the legend due to the amount of redundancy, especially for experienced console players. What we did do, though, is we added a basic button legend during setup. It introduced commonly used buttons like select and back to new to Xbox players contextually. We did this to support a best practice of focusing on only one skill at a time, to ensure learning is gradual and users don't get overwhelmed by new information. We specifically made it part of the setup process when brand new users are using the controller for the very first time. We, however, would not keep reinforcing A and B functions in button legends once the setup was done, to ensure we wouldn't overload the button legend for all users, and using those functions is so widely relevant and often done that it would simply make the button legend overwhelming and quickly feel redundant. We also added single, concise, and illustrated tips to visualize invisible elements. This would help users map the physical control on their controller to the digital response. We did this as a result of a UR insight, which indicated that teaching tips, which included animations, were more successful than those without, because users did not need to read all the text to understand the concept. And the animation also made the teaching more noticeable and delightful to look at. We added teaching moments because letting users practice the concept being taught is more effective. This would require the user to engage in active rather than passive learning and allow them to instantly practice and apply what they're learning and receive immediate feedback on their success or failure. We also added our first help bubble, what we're calling it, which taught players in this specific instance to quickly jump from the default landing position of the guide menu to the very bottom of it using a trigger pull on the controller. The result was that 66% reported that they were able to learn what the help bubble was promoting, and they saw value in them. And even better numbers came out of the interaction measurements themselves, where we found a very high number of people following the breadcrumb of the help bubble. It was so successful that we managed to define it as a new standard for how to teach new and sometimes hard to intuitively find features or interactions. We found that we had to be a bit persistent with this first help bubble, because showing it only once would have the risk of players never noticing it. In the end, we had it persist a few times or until the user had done the action that was being promoted. The result of these contextualized teaching moments was evident. In the general audience survey we conducted with roughly 2,600 new console users who had used the console for less than 1 week, we had significantly higher average confidence ratings than we had seen before. We realized that progressively disclosing teaching moments contextually helps users associate button presses to its function when the players really care about it. We added controller guide in our Assist app to help teach how to use the controller. So we still did it, we just didn't have it part of the setup. Click-through rate increased from 0.95 to 1.4 between March and June 2022. And players could find the controller tutorial and other help articles like it again in the support app whenever they wanted, when they needed it. In a third case study, we asked ourselves, how can we help users feel more confident navigating through the Xbox experience? We really had to challenge our assumptions and not assume things would feel familiar to our users. For the team, after working in our Xbox ecosystem for so long, we had kind of forgotten how overwhelming it could be to brand new users. It was an internal challenge to convince all parties of the benefits of revisiting our onboarding experience and to action on the UR insights that we had gotten. The general sentiment at the time showed us that we had some challenges to work through. We would get feedback like, it took me weeks to find the headset volume. Also, 22 button presses to shut down the Xbox. Another quote from a new user: "The hardest part to get used to for me was using the interface. It was so new and different, and I would get confused on where things were at." Another challenge we uncovered: 20% of users didn't know about the Xbox button. Prior to our controller guides, a significant number of users didn't realize the Xbox button on the controller was actually a button. The Xbox button has a lot of functions. Most importantly, it opens the Xbox guide, a menu which is essential to navigate the console. And we found that 25% of users couldn't turn off their console. Responses in our study confirmed that a substantial portion of new users just struggled to turn off the console, unless they just kind of like unplugged it every time or something. We also observed that some users struggled with exiting their game. New users repeatedly mentioned struggling with how to exit a game. Some felt trapped without knowing how to leave the screen. Some of you might think that that's a good thing, I don't know. Another challenge was that some users had trouble finding various things, which are important things. They struggled with finding the settings menu, locating search, and getting to the store. We did try some things which just didn't work out. So what were those things? Despite receiving a teaching tip about the search function of the Y button, so the Y button is bound to take you to search, 43% of first-week users reported not knowing about this. And more experience on the console didn't seem to greatly impact this learning function either. 28% of one-month users reported the same thing. From this, we kind of understood that the onboarding experience can be overwhelming when there's a lot of things being taught all at once. There's a lot of things to learn and digest. And potentially having tips placed at the bottoms can be problematic due to the banner blindness that tends to happen with it. So here are the solutions we did to improve, giving you all a sneak peek of the home experience of the Xbox console. We did a solution to surface key elements. In our upcoming update, we'll be introducing a new home experience which will surface key areas of interest based on our research. So this is going to include things like game library, store, search, settings, and onboarding tips. So far, we've seen internal testing that indicates that there are positive data around the discovery and engagement with these things, especially settings, search, and other things. The next solution that we did was teach contextually, and for this we targeted opening the guide UI specifically. We introduced an informational pop-up toast which teaches essential patterns like what the guide is and how to access it, informing users that by pressing the Xbox button on their controller, they can navigate the entire Xbox experience. Another teach contextually solution we did was for turning off the console. Once the guide is opened, we display an informational shortcut on the first tab of guide, letting users know that they can hold the Xbox button for power options and to turn off the console. A highly convenient way to quickly get to those essential options at any point in the whole Xbox console experience. For leaving a game, we created a new toast which will appear after users have entered their first game, explaining how to exit the game. We're still running some tests to validate when the best time to bring this message would be, as it should ideally happen when players are not busy anymore with the onboarding of the game itself. So it shouldn't really clash with that experience, but we want to kind of like figure out what is the right timing. Maybe machine learning can help us there. So how'd we do? To assess the impact of our onboarding updates, we conducted a survey of general audience users with a new account on Xbox consoles between August 27th and September 12th, 2021. 2,656 people completed that survey. Here are some of the highlights from the results. 85% found the new tips helpful. New users who received the new tips felt more confident navigating the console during their first week. 20% plus users learned something new. Previous studies have shown that people are unfamiliar with Xbox controller buttons. The new teaching tip helped a substantial portion of new users learn that the Xbox button on a controller is a button. 74% read all the tips, and 54% specifically requested to see more as they were onboarding. Participants expressed comments of appreciation towards the new contextual onboarding. So what's next in this space for us? We aim to improve onboarding across all endpoints. So we will bring the learnings from the surfaces we initially introduced these onboarding improvements to across all our endpoints and ensure that they're represented in a coherent way to our players. And taking the extensive look at the entire end-to-end experience for our new users, here's some of the things that we've learned. Keep biases in check. Testing our hypothesis early allows us to proactively resolve potential experience gaps instead of reacting to complaints or confused sentiments. An example here would be assuming that players already knew how to navigate the interface or accelerators. Crawl, walk, then run. Start small and experiment with a concept or a solution. And as you become more confident in the solution, expand the usage of it to deliver the highest value to players. An example here would be testing and validating a single use case for teaching tips before increasing its usage across the experience. And share and leverage successes across endpoints. Apply feature improvements to other endpoints by sharing and collaborating with other teams. And in doing so, our experience becomes more coherent. An example here is using informational toasts to teach players how to open the guide or exit a game. And then when you want to apply that to other endpoints that support the same features, once you've validated in one, you can bring it to the other ones as well. Moving forward, we want to continue to build user confidence. We'll teach new concepts both gradually and contextually, allowing users to become experts over time. New to Xbox Data Dashboard. This is an exciting thing that we're building, and it's an internal data dashboard that specifically focuses on our new users, and it helps us assess how our improvements are doing more often than we've done in the past. Further improve the Xbox onboarding experience. So we're going to continue to implement more ways to further improve the onboarding experience while focusing on getting users to play as quickly as possible, which is always their ultimate goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Orvar. Okay, I'm going to start the questions here, but again, if you want to ask a question verbally, just raise your hand. Anonymous question, how did you differentiate between an onboarding problem versus... What? Can you hear me? Yeah. How do you differentiate between an onboarding problem versus a usability problem? Was there an assumption that existing screens were already optimized?
Ooh, interesting. I think we would rely on our accessibility partners and your team to kind of help us identify that. So one of the things that I didn't really touch on in this talk is that we are using a design system called Xbox Design System. And a lot of the components that we built through that have been kind of pre-validated from an accessibility standpoint. We've gone through all the kind of like the major check-ins of like, is this gonna work in all the different modes that we support, like dark mode, light mode, high contrast? Does the contrast ratio that needs to be supported in all the different kind of like modes of the different button kind of visuals, does all of that kind of match the plans that we put in place? So a lot of those things are kind of just defined already. And then when we're putting together the experience, or rather kind of evaluating something that we've done in the past, that is more geared towards how do we improve things in the experience itself. And so in onboarding, I think it kind of gets combined a little bit, but we address it more through a design system if it's usability related, and we address it through these other kind of validations when it's actually onboarding related.
Another anonymous question, how do you balance the two customer requirements? There are too many steps in onboarding, and I want to know more tips during onboarding. Seem at odds with each other.
Yeah, totally. It's very tough. I think what we do is we kind of recognize that there's going to be folks that prefer learning in different ways, and we can't just have multiple ways of learning all kind of combined into the setup process. It has to be very streamlined. So we try to really, that's why we had these principles in place. We really wanted to keep ourselves honest in terms of having it be very short and to the point of the most essential things, and then always kind of provide users with this kind of breakout point where they would realize that there's a way to get more information, maybe through the mobile app. Maybe once they are done with all these necessary steps, they can go to the Assist app and get more information. So, of course, a lot of our partners really wanted to put all of their things into the essential steps, but we really needed to kind of uphold the main principle of making it so that they could get into the game as fast as possible, if that was their preference. So not forcing everyone through all the steps, but allowing them to go to the steps if they needed it.
A very burning question from Rebecca, and we're all asking ourselves, for real though, how do you turn the Xbox off? All right, sorry. All right, okay. Rob is asking, how does churn manifest in a system flow rather than a game? How do you churn on an entire functional system interface? Is it in regards to the use of features?
Yeah, that's a really fair question. Like with a game, you can just choose to not play that game anymore and play another game, but how do you like just stop using a whole system? But it happens. I mean, it does. Like new players would just kind of like get it and they would start using it, and then we would see, just the usage go way down. And then when we would want to investigate why that was happening, some of them would give us these reasons, and some of them felt very, very fair. I wouldn't dare turn something on if I didn't know how to turn it off.
All right, we have to stop here. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, ORVAR.
Thank you.